They laughed at Keanu Reeves the moment he walked into the Tesla showroom. Simple clothes, no luxury look, just silence. The manager didn't even take him seriously. But minutes later, one payment notification changed everything. And suddenly, no one was laughing anymore. The afternoon sun poured through the massive glass walls of the Tesla showroom on Sunset Boulevard, turning the entire space into something that looked less like a car dealership and more like a glimpse into the future, where every surface gleamed and the polished white floors reflected the sleek curves of the vehicles like mirrors, while the quiet hum of ambient music created an atmosphere of calm luxury, and customers walked slowly between the cars dressed in designer suits, their expensive watches catching the light with every movement, making it clear that this was a place where status spoke loudly without anyone needing to raise their voice. And at the front of the showroom stood Daniel Carter, the manager, a man who believed he could understand people within seconds as he watched everything with sharp eyes and folded arms, silently judging who was worth attention and who wasn't, because in his world appearances told the truth. Expensive shoes meant serious money, tailored suits meant reliable clients, and confidence came dressed well or it didn't come at all. And that belief had never failed him until that moment when the glass door opened quietly and a tall man stepped inside, unnoticed at first. Not because he wasn't noticeable but because he didn't fit the environment. Wearing a faded black t-shirt slightly worn at the collar, simple blue jeans, and old boots covered with a thin layer of dust, his hair slightly messy and his face calm and thoughtful, not impressed or excited but observant, which Daniel noticed immediately and just as quickly dismissed as one of the younger sales associates leaned in and whispered if he should help him, only for Daniel to smirk slightly and say to let him look because he was probably just curious, while the man ignored the stares and walked slowly toward a deep red Tesla Model S placed perfectly under the showroom lights, gently running his fingers along the side panel not like someone impressed by luxury but like someone appreciating craftsmanship, moving without rush, hesitation, or confusion as he examined the wheels, the lines, the details with precise focus that didn't match the story Daniel had already created about him. Yet Daniel still stepped forward, adjusting his tie and wearing what he thought was a professional smile, though the hint of amusement behind it was clear as he politely but sharply remarked that the vehicle started at over $90,000, prompting the man to turn calmly and reply that he knew, which made Daniel chuckle lightly before asking if he was just browsing for fun and mentioning that test drives required appointments. But the man held his gaze steadily, neither challenged nor offended, simply stating that he wanted to talk about buying three. A statement that shifted the air as Daniel blinked, repeated the word free, and laughed louder than intended while nearby employees turned their heads, and he dismissed the idea by saying these weren't toys, yet the man remained unfazed and calmly asked to see the long-range version, leading Daniel to look him up and down again more openly and respond with sarcasm about running a credit check, earning quiet smiles from nearby staff as the man nodded and assured him it wouldn't be a problem, his calm certainty hinting at something deeper that Daniel ignored because he had already decided who the man was, continuing to question whether he had an appointment and being told no, that he was just in the area, which led Daniel to say they prioritized scheduled clients, but the man simply nodded again and said he could wait before stepping aside without frustration, argument, or any need to prove himself. Returning to the car while the atmosphere subtly shifted as people began watching, noticing not noise but tension as he moved toward a midnight blue Model X near the window and studied it carefully, asking precise, informed questions about battery capacity, range, and long-term performance that only someone knowledgeable would ask. Something Daniel noticed as a small doubt crept into his mind, though his pride kept him holding on to his first impression, while across the showroom a few customers paid attention to the quiet tension, and the man remained calm, composed, and unbothered as if the laughter didn't belong to him but to someone else's mistake, until he turned slightly and noticed a young saleswoman standing near a display table who wasn't smirking or whispering but simply observing with quiet focus, and that was enough for him to walk toward her and gently ask for help, to which she immediately looked up and smiled warmly without hesitation or judgment, responding with simple respect as her name tag read Maria. And in that small, genuine moment, everything began to change. Maria didn't ask what he could afford, she didn't glance at his clothes, and she didn't measure his worth in seconds like everyone else had. Instead, she stepped beside him as if he truly belonged in the Tesla showroom, asking calmly and professionally which model he would like to start with. As the man turned slightly toward the red Model S again, his eyes focused not with admiration but with analysis as he explained that he was interested in the long-range and performance versions but wanted real-world comparisons, causing Maria to pause for just a brief moment. Not out of doubt but because most customers didn't begin with such technical intent, as they usually asked about colors, seats, or screens. Yet she quickly adapted and pulled up detailed data on her tablet, explaining that the long-range model offered more miles per charge while the performance version focused on acceleration and power depending on usage, and as he nodded he asked how highway speeds affected actual range, prompting a slight lift in Maria's eyebrows, this time with clear respect as she explained that higher speeds, especially above 70 miles per hour, reduced range, though Tesla's software helped optimize consumption based on driving patterns. And he listened carefully, not pretending or guessing but truly understanding, before continuing to ask about charging times from 20% to 80% on a standard supercharger, to which she replied it typically took 25 to 30 minutes depending on conditions, and again he nodded as if connecting each answer into a larger plan rather than simply satisfying curiosity. While they moved slowly across the showroom floor toward the Model X where sunlight struck the vehicle perfectly, highlighting its sharp design, as he lightly placed his hand on the door and asked about durability under long daily use, leading Maria to respond honestly that the cars were built for such demands with minimal maintenance compared to traditional vehicles and continuous software updates that improved performance over time. And when he asked about battery health, she explained the importance of maintaining charge between 20% and 80% for daily use while avoiding constant full charges unless necessary, which earned another small nod from him before he suddenly shifted the conversation by asking about fleet purchasing, a question that made Maria pause for a split second because it wasn't something casual buyers asked. And when she carefully inquired whether the cars were for personal use, he shook his head and explained that they were intended for a youth community center he supported, describing a clean transportation program designed to provide reliable vehicles for outreach, transport, and daily operations, speaking without pride or any attempt to impress but with a quiet sense of purpose that immediately softened Maria's expression as she responded sincerely that it was amazing, her words no longer part of a sales script but genuine admiration. While he offered a modest smile and simply said he tried to help where he could, and in that moment Maria no longer saw his worn clothes but the reason behind them as they moved to a small glass desk where she quickly opened detailed pricing configurations, her focus sharper now as she explained the cost of a fully upgraded Model S Plaid with performance and long-range optimization, turning the tablet toward him as he studied the numbers carefully without reaction or hesitation before asking if they could configure 3 identical units, prompting Maria to confirm that they could, and after a brief pause he calmly stated that he would take 3, a statement that caused her breath to catch as her fingers froze over the tablet and she softly repeated the order for 3 fully upgraded Model S Plaid vehicles, reminding him the total would be around $400,000, yet he didn't flinch and simply replied that it was fine, as if the amount carried no weight compared to the purpose behind it, leaving Maria momentarily stunned as she asked if he preferred financing options only for him to shake his head and state they would pay in full, shifting the entire atmosphere from curiosity to undeniable reality as she immediately began preparing the paperwork with careful precision, confirming delivery arrangements and assistance with setting up charging stations at the community center while he calmly agreed, and across the showroom Daniel watched the interaction evolve from mild curiosity to growing confusion and finally tension, sensing that something about the situation no longer matched his earlier assumptions as he muttered that it was a waste of time even while beginning to doubt his own judgment. While back at the desk Maria finalized the invoice and the man quietly made a short phone call with simple instructions before confirming she could proceed, and within moments notifications appeared on her screen as the payment status moved from pending to processing and finally completed, causing her breath to catch as the reality of the fully paid transaction settled in without delays or complications. While Daniel slowly stepped closer, almost unwillingly, leaning just enough to see the screen as the truth hit him instantly. The number was real, the payment was real, and the man he had dismissed was undeniably real, while around the showroom the earlier laughter faded into complete silence, replaced by the kind of stillness That follows a harsh realization, as Maria looked up and confirmed the payment professionally despite her shock, and the man simply nodded as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet for everyone else the moment changed everything, leaving Daniel standing there with the crushing awareness that his greatest mistake had already been made. The silence inside the Tesla showroom no longer felt like the calm, polished quiet of a luxury space but something heavier, something uncomfortable, as if the air itself had shifted and everyone present could feel the weight of what had just happened. While the man in the faded black t-shirt sat calmly at the glass desk with a relaxed posture and an unchanged expression, as though transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars within seconds was nothing out of the ordinary, and across from him Maria tried to maintain her professionalism even as a slight tremor lingered in her hands from the moment she had just witnessed. While only a few feet away, Daniel Carter stood frozen in a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, uncertainty, as he stared again at the tablet screen, almost hoping to find some kind of mistake, a delay, a failed transaction, anything that could restore the version of reality he had constructed in his mind. Yet there was nothing, because the payment was complete, clean, and final, and in that instant the entire story Daniel had built about the man collapsed without warning, forcing him to straighten his posture in a subtle attempt to regain control as his instincts as a manager pushed him to reclaim authority, prompting him to state that documentation would still need to be verified, his tone firmer now, though lacking its earlier confidence, while the man simply looked at him calmly and replied with quiet agreement, offering no resistance, no attitude, no emotional reaction, which somehow made the situation even more difficult for Daniel because there was nothing to challenge, nothing to push against, only silent cooperation, as Maria continued finalizing the purchase details with renewed focus, understanding that this was no longer just a sale but a moment that would be remembered long after. The day ended, softly confirming that everything looked good and that they would proceed with delivery scheduling and installation planning, earning a simple but meaningful thank you from the man, whose words carried weight precisely because they were genuine, while across the showroom employees who had once whispered with amusement now spoke in disbelief, questioning whether what they had just seen was real as Daniel overheard every word, each one reinforcing the reality he wished he could undo, leading him to step forward again more cautiously and ask for the man's name for the records, to which the man paused briefly before answering with a single word, Keanu, spoken without emphasis or introduction. Yet this time Daniel heard it differently as recognition began to form, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the man's face more carefully, noticing the familiar jawline, the calm eyes, the quiet presence, until the realization struck him fully and his voice weakened as he repeated the name and added the surname, asking if he was Keanu Reeves, receiving a small, almost reluctant nod in confirmation, and in that moment the room shifted once again, not loudly or dramatically but deeply, because now the truth extended beyond wealth into identity, recognition, and the understanding that the man Daniel had dismissed was not only capable of such a purchase but was already known around the world as one of the most respected and admired figures in Hollywood, making Daniel's mistake feel even heavier as heat rushed to his face and his chest tightened, realizing that he hadn't just misjudged a customer but had disrespected someone widely known for humility and kindness. Yet despite the shift in perception, Keanu showed no change in behavior, no attempt to use his name as leverage or power, instead turning back to Maria and calmly continuing the conversation about charging stations, asking for long-term efficient recommendations, allowing her to regain her composure as she explained options for residential and commercial-grade setups, while he listened attentively with the same focus and presence as before, as if the recognition meant nothing to him, leaving Daniel standing there with only his thoughts as he slowly began to understand that the man he had judged had no interest in proving anything or correcting anyone, having simply come to accomplish his purpose with quiet confidence that spoke louder than anything Daniel had said. As minutes passed with Maria outlining installation timelines, energy efficiency strategies, and potential solar integration while Keanu asked thoughtful questions and occasionally made notes on his phone, every action deliberate and composed, while Daniel remained in the background no longer leading but observing, experiencing for the first time in a long while what it felt like not to be the most important person in the room, as he realized that true importance came not from position but from presence, something Keanu carried effortlessly, until Maria finally concluded the next steps and confirmed that updates would be provided throughout the delivery process, receiving a simple thank you in return as Keanu stood up calmly without any rush or need to impress, extending his hand toward Maria in genuine appreciation, which she warmly accepted, before he turned slightly and met Daniel's eyes in a brief but powerful moment that carried no anger, no accusation, only quiet awareness, leaving Daniel with a sense of reflection he couldn't escape, as if he were being shown who he had been without a single word spoken, followed by a small nod from Keanu that wasn't approval or forgiveness but simple acknowledgement, after which he walked toward the exit as the glass doors opened and sunlight poured in, and just like that he was gone, yet the silence he left behind remained, lingering in the space as no one moved or spoke immediately, because everyone understood they had witnessed something meaningful, not merely a transaction but a lesson, while Daniel stood still staring at the door long after it closed, his faint reflection visible in the glass as he finally confronted something he hadn't before, realizing that his greatest mistake had not been laughing, doubting, or even misjudging, but believing with complete certainty that he had been right. That evening, the lights inside the Tesla showroom dimmed one by one, leaving behind a soft glow that reflected across the polished floors, yet the energy that once filled the space had completely faded as customers had gone, doors were locked, and the silence that returned no longer felt peaceful but heavy, pressing down on everything, especially inside the glass-walled office where Daniel Carter now sat alone, surrounded by the same environment that once gave him a sense of control and authority but now felt more like a spotlight exposing every thought he couldn't escape. As his eyes drifted across the showroom floor where everything remained perfectly arranged, the cars aligned, the desks organized, every detail intact, except for the one thing that refused to settle, his mind, which kept replaying the afternoon again and again, from the faded black t-shirt to the calm voice and the exact moment he had laughed, until he finally leaned forward and turned on his computer, the screen lighting up his face in the dim room as he opened the daily sales report, telling himself it was routine, just numbers, just another day, even though deep down he already knew it wasn't, and when the system finished loading and the final figures appeared, his entire body went still as his eyes widened at the total displayed at the top, a number far beyond what he had expected, higher than an average day, higher than even a strong day, something that clearly marked a record, causing his heartbeat to slow for a brief second before rising again as he scrolled down and saw the details. 3 Model S Plaid purchases, fully upgraded and paid in full, yet it didn't stop there, because below that were additional entries for charging stations, installation packages, extended warranties, energy solutions, and even solar integration options, each line adding more weight to the realization of what had happened, prompting him to lean back slowly in his chair as if physical distance might help him process it, whispering to himself that it couldn't be real even though every digit confirmed otherwise, until a second realization struck him even harder than the first as he noticed that the sale wasn't attached to his name at all but instead belonged entirely to Maria, tightening his throat as he understood in that instant that everything had shifted, that the biggest sale of the month, the one that could define the showroom's success, had come not from his judgment but from her decision to treat someone with simple respect, leading him to rub his face slowly as if trying to erase the memory, even though he knew he couldn't, because the sale wasn't just about numbers but about what those numbers proved. And as he navigated deeper into the report with slower, more careful movements, he found the customer feedback section, short and simple yet powerful enough to affect him more than anything else. Reading it once and then again as the words praised Maria for her professionalism and attentiveness before reaching a single line that stood out above everything else, I felt judged by management at first, which caused him to lean back immediately as if physically pushed away by the truth of it, his chest tightening and his mouth drying because the statement didn't exaggerate or accuse but simply stated reality, making it even harder to ignore as he stared up at the ceiling with his thoughts louder than ever, questioning the beliefs he had always held about himself, about his instincts, about his ability to read people quickly and accurately, realizing now that those same instincts had led him to failure. And when he looked at his reflection in the glass wall of his office, his suit still sharp, his tie slightly loosened, he noticed that the confidence he once saw there had been replaced by doubt, by a quiet and uncomfortable understanding that he had not been as right as he believed, until a sudden knock on the door broke the silence and pulled him back into the moment, prompting him to straighten and respond before the door opened to reveal Ms. Grant, the regional director, whose presence alone commanded attention as she stepped inside holding a folder, her expression calm yet serious, informing him that she had reviewed the day's numbers, which he acknowledged with a forced smile and a brief comment about strong performance, only for her to correct him by calling it incredible, placing the folder on his desk and mentioning that she had heard the buyer was Keanu Reeves, causing his throat to tighten once more as he confirmed it quietly, while she studied him and asked whether he had recognized him, leading to a brief hesitation before he answered that he wasn't sure, a response that avoided the full truth as she nodded and remarked that Keanu was known for dressing simply and not caring about appearances, a statement that now carried far more meaning for Daniel than it would have just hours earlier, before she opened the folder and referenced the feedback left behind, noting how the customer had praised Maria's professionalism, which Daniel acknowledged even though the words felt insufficient because it wasn't just her performance but her character that had made the difference. And when Ms. Grant added that the customer had also mentioned feeling judged by management, the words landed heavier than before because now they were spoken aloud without distance or buffer, leaving Daniel with no choice but to face them directly as he admitted quietly that he understood, prompting Ms. Grant to remind him firmly that their business was not just about selling cars but about creating an experience where every person who walked through those doors deserved respect regardless of appearance, a statement he agreed with, though now it felt like something he was learning for the first time rather than something he already knew, until she moved toward the door and paused to deliver one final line, that clothes don't pay, the person does, before leaving the room and closing the door behind her, returning Daniel to silence once again, yet this time it felt different, not heavy but clear, as if everything that needed to be said had already been spoken, leaving him sitting there for a long time without moving, no longer thinking about sales or numbers but repeating one simple truth in his mind over and over again. He had been wrong, not just about the customer but about himself, and for the first time in years that realization carried more weight than any success he had ever achieved. That night, Daniel Carter didn't sleep, no matter how much he tried, because the moment he turned off the lights and lay back in the quiet of his apartment, his mind refused to rest, filling the darkness not with plans or numbers but with memories from the Tesla showroom, the laughter, the faded black t-shirt, and the calm face that never reacted, as he turned from side to side, staring up at the ceiling while the distant noise of the city continued outside, cars passing and lights flickering through the curtains, yet inside his room everything felt still except for his thoughts, which refused to slow down because what he was experiencing wasn't just embarrassment but realization, and realization has a way of echoing louder than anything else, forcing him to replay the exact moment he laughed, noticing how natural it had felt, how effortless, and realizing that this was what disturbed him the most, not that he made a mistake, but how easily he made it, as if it wasn't the first time but a habit he had never questioned, leading him to sit up slowly and run his hands through his hair, his chest tightening as he whispered to himself how many times he had done this before, a question that lingered unanswered because the truth was he didn't know, and that uncertainty felt heavier than the mistake itself, pushing him out of bed and toward the window where he pulled the curtain aside and looked out at the endless stretch of city lights, each one representing people he didn't know, people he might have judged or dismissed without ever realizing it, making him exhale slowly as he came to understand that judgment wasn't just a single mistake but a pattern, and patterns don't disappear overnight, until another realization struck him even harder, that it wasn't just that he had judged the man, but what that judgment almost cost him. Not just the biggest sale of the month but something far more meaningful, because those vehicles weren't for luxury alone but for a purpose, for a community center, for a program meant to help young people, and he had laughed at the person trying to build it, causing him to close his eyes tightly as the weight of that truth settled in, realizing this was no longer about money but about values. And as he stepped back from the window and sat down again on the edge of his bed, quieter and more aware, he began to see clearly that the man, Keanu Reeves, had not defined that moment through wealth, fame, or power, but through calmness, through restraint, through a refusal to react or prove anything, something Daniel knew he wouldn't have done himself, as he admitted quietly that he would have defended himself, raised his voice, tried to prove his worth, yet Keanu hadn't, and that absence of reaction had made him stronger, untouchable in a way Daniel had never understood before, because when someone doesn't need to prove anything, there is nothing you can take from them. Leading Daniel to lean back and stare at the ceiling once again, But this time his thoughts had shifted, no longer those of a manager calculating outcomes but of a person confronting who he had been and who he might become, understanding finally that respect isn't a strategy you apply after evaluating someone but a choice you make before you know anything about them. As the room slowly began to feel quieter, not empty but settled, like the storm inside his mind had calmed enough for clarity to emerge, prompting him to reach for his phone almost out of habit. Before opening the showroom staff group chat where messages from earlier still lingered, conversations about the sale, about Maria, about how unexpected everything had been, and as he scrolled through them his thumb paused over the keyboard, hesitating because what he was about to do wasn't something he usually did, as managers corrected others but rarely corrected themselves, yet tonight that approach felt wrong, so he began typing slowly, admitting that he had made a mistake, that he had judged a customer based on appearance and been wrong, acknowledging that Maria's professionalism and respect had saved an important opportunity, and after a brief pause he added one final line about resetting the standard moving forward with no assumptions and only respect, reading the message twice before sending it, watching as it was seen but not immediately answered, which didn't bother him because the message wasn't about validation but accountability, and as he placed the phone beside him and lay back once more, closing his eyes again, the silence no longer felt heavy but earned. Because growth doesn't come from comfort but from facing something within yourself that you don't like and choosing to change it anyway, and as the hours passed slowly and quietly Daniel eventually drifted into sleep, not peacefully but honestly, which was enough. Because sometimes that kind of rest marks the beginning of something better, and by the time morning arrived it wouldn't simply be another day but a real test, not of sales or numbers, but of the person he had decided to become. The next morning, the Tesla showroom opened just like it always did, the glass doors unlocking with a soft click as the lights came on in perfect sequence and reflected across the polished floor, while the cars stood in their precise positions, flawless and silent, as if nothing had changed. But for Daniel Carter, everything had changed, and that difference was already visible in the way he arrived earlier than usual, not because he had to but because something unsettled inside him refused to let him stay away, pushing him to walk into his office, place his keys down slowly, and stand there looking out across the empty showroom floor, thinking not about sales targets or performance metrics but about one simple question: how he would act today. Because now it wasn't about fixing yesterday but proving that yesterday meant something. As the staff began to arrive one by one, their quiet greetings and morning routines rebuilding the usual rhythm of the space, yet there was a subtle shift in their behavior as their eyes lingered on Daniel just a little longer than usual, not with disrespect but with curiosity, because they had seen what happened and now they were watching what would happen next, prompting Daniel to step out of his office and onto the showroom floor where he didn't immediately call for attention or raise his voice but instead waited until everyone had settled and the space felt ready before calmly asking for a minute, gathering the staff into a loose circle between the cars where some stood with arms crossed, others with hands in pockets, and a few avoiding eye contact. While Daniel took a breath and chose honesty over authority, admitting without hesitation that he had made a mistake the day before by judging a customer based on appearance, assuming things, laughing, and ultimately being wrong, words that landed heavily in the quiet room because they were direct and unfiltered, as he continued by explaining that it wasn't about who that customer was but about who they were as a team, emphasizing that they didn't get to decide someone's value in the first 5 seconds and that respect wasn't something earned after seeing what someone could afford but something given first, every time, transforming the moment from a business discussion into something deeper about character, before he turned toward Maria and acknowledged her handling of the situation, pointing out that she had listened, avoided judgment, and treated the customer with respect from the beginning, which not only led to a successful sale but set the standard for everyone moving forward, leaving the room quiet yet filled with a new kind of understanding, as Daniel concluded simply that from that day onward there would be no assumptions, no shortcuts, only respect, after which the team dispersed without applause or dramatic reaction but with a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, as conversations resumed and customers began to enter while Daniel chose to remain on the floor instead of returning to his office, observing closely and learning from small moments, a warm greeting offered without hesitation, a patient explanation given to someone unsure, assistance provided without judgment, realizing that these small actions collectively shape the culture of the space, something not created by rules but by behavior, until the glass doors opened again and Daniel's breath caught. slightly as he saw Keanu Reeves walk in once more with the same calm presence and simple style, drawing quiet attention from a showroom not through spectacle but through recognition. Yet this time the difference was clear as no one judged, no one hesitated, and Maria stepped forward immediately with a warm, professional greeting, guiding him toward the desk to discuss delivery details and installation plans while Daniel watched for a moment before taking a slow breath and stepping forward himself, not with confidence but with honesty, stopping at a respectful distance as Keanu turned to face him, and the space seemed to still again, prompting Daniel to extend his hand and quietly offer an apology without excuses or explanations, admitting that he had judged him based on appearance and laughed, acknowledging it as wrong with steady sincerity, while the surrounding staff subtly paid attention without making it obvious, as Keanu listened calmly and after a brief moment reached out to shake his hand with a firm and composed gesture, responding simply that it was okay and that everyone makes mistakes, words that brought not relief or pride but a quiet sense of acceptance to Daniel, who thanked him genuinely this time. As Maria smoothly continued the conversation about delivery schedules and charging installations while Keanu listened and asked practical questions, allowing business to move forward naturally, yet the significance of the moment lingered in the space because everyone had witnessed not just the mistake but the correction and the growth that followed, until Keanu finished reviewing the details and turned to Maria with gratitude, telling her that she had treated him like a person who mattered, to which she responded simply and truthfully that he did, before he gave a small nod and walked toward the exit once more with the same calm presence, leaving behind not tension or silence but understanding. As the glass doors closed and Daniel stood there realizing something that no meeting or rule could teach, that respect isn't something you declare, it's something you prove in a single moment when it matters most. After the glass doors closed behind Keanu Reeves, the Tesla showroom didn't return to normal, because it couldn't, as something deeper had shifted, not just in a single interaction, not just in one moment, but in everyone who had witnessed it. While the cars remained perfectly aligned under the lights and the polished floors continued to reflect every movement as customers walked in with their usual curiosity and quiet expectations, yet the energy inside the space felt different, quieter, more aware, more human. As Daniel Carter stood near the center of the showroom for a few seconds after Keanu left with his hands resting naturally at his sides and his posture relaxed, not controlled or calculated but genuine, and for the first time in a long while his thoughts weren't focused on closing deals but on understanding people. Watching as Maria returned to her station and placed her tablet down neatly before assisting another customer with the same steady tone and unchanged approach, showing no sign of arrogance or inflated confidence despite having completed the biggest sale of the month, which made Daniel realize that real professionalism doesn't shift with success but remains consistent before and after it, while across the showroom a younger sales associate approached a casually dressed customer who might have been overlooked the day before and greeted them warmly without hesitation or judgment, offering help with a genuine smile, a small moment that lingered with Daniel because it represented the difference, a single action creating a ripple effect, one decision reshaping behavior, turning the showroom from just a place that sold cars into a place where people were treated better. As time passed and the day continued like any other on the surface while underneath subtle changes formed a new standard not through rules but through example, until later that afternoon when Daniel returned to his office and stood by the glass wall instead of sitting immediately, looking down at the same showroom floor from the same angle yet with a completely different perspective, no longer searching for who looked like a potential buyer but observing how every person was treated, noticing patience where there once might have been impatience, respect where there might have been assumptions, and care where there might have been shortcuts, causing him to exhale slowly as a quiet sense of relief settled in, realizing that for the first time he wasn't just managing performance but shaping culture, something far more meaningful than numbers alone, as he walked back to his desk and opened the sales dashboard not out of pressure but curiosity, seeing that the numbers remained strong yet no longer feeling the same weight because he now understood that numbers show results but behavior reveals character, and without the right behavior the numbers don't last, leading him to open a blank note and type a simple heading, New Standard, before writing that every person who walks through the door deserves respect not because of what they wear or what they can afford but because they are human, adding another line that assumptions cost more than missed sales because they cost trust. And as he paused to read those words he recognized them not as ideas but as lessons earned through experience. while downstairs Maria continued assisting customers with quiet focus, carrying the significance of the previous day not as a victory but as a responsibility, because respect isn't shown once but chosen repeatedly, and for her it came naturally, which is why it made such an impact. As the afternoon light shifted across the showroom and Daniel stepped out again without needing to speak or remind anyone of what had happened, because the lesson was already visible in the way people interacted, listened, and responded, making it stronger than any speech, until one employee approached him and mentioned that what happened the day before had changed something, prompting Daniel to nod in agreement because he understood that change doesn't always come from success but often from being wrong and having the courage to admit it. And as the day drew to a close with the showroom still bright and the cars still gleaming, it became clear that they were no longer the most impressive part of the space, the people were, because they had learned something many places never truly understand. That respect isn't tied to status but to choice, and those who choose it stand out more than any luxury product ever could. As Daniel stood near the entrance watching the last customers leave and offering each one a sincere goodbye not out of obligation but intention, recognizing now the difference between the two, and as the doors closed for the final time that evening he carried with him a realization that would stay far beyond the day, that the most important moment of the week hadn't been the sale, the money, or even the identity of the customer, but the lesson itself, because lessons like that don't just change a single day. They change the people who choose to learn from them. The next few days passed quietly inside the Tesla showroom, without headlines or viral attention, yet something meaningful had shifted beneath the surface, not in dramatic ways that outsiders would notice but in the small, everyday moments that truly define a place. As customers continued to walk in, some confident, some unsure, some simply curious, but now each one was greeted the same way, with respect that wasn't measured or calculated but given freely, and Daniel Carter stood near the entrance that morning watching a man in simple clothes step inside, noticing how for a brief second his old instinct tried to return, attempting to categorize and decide. Yet this time he stopped it before it could turn into judgment, stepping forward with a calm and welcoming tone to greet the man and offer help, creating a moment that felt natural and comfortable, and just like that a new pattern replaced the old one, proving that change isn't defined by one big moment but by what follows it. While across the showroom Maria continued her work with the same focus and respect she had always shown, needing no adjustment because she had been consistent from the beginning, and now others were beginning to mirror that behavior not because they were told to but because they had witnessed its impact and felt the difference it created. As Daniel walked slowly across the floor observing without interference, noticing conversations becoming more natural, customers staying longer, and questions being answered with patience rather than assumptions, transforming the environment into something better, not just in service but in experience. And as time passed the sales numbers remained strong, even improving, though this time Daniel didn't celebrate them in the same way because he understood where they came from, recognizing that respect builds trust, trust leads to decisions, and decisions create results, leading him later that afternoon to sit in his office reviewing reports without the tension that once accompanied them. Scrolling through customer feedback where short, simple comments repeated the same themes: friendly staff, helpful experience, feeling comfortable, words that mattered more than any product detail or pricing strategy because they reflected emotion, and emotion is what people remember, prompting him to lean back and look out across the showroom as his thoughts returned not to the sale but to the moment that started everything, recalling the calm presence of Keanu Reeves, the quiet confidence, and the composed response to being judged, realizing now that the lesson had never come from words or correction but from example, from patience, from restraint, from the ability to remain focused without reacting, understanding that people often learn more from what they witness than from what they are told. And as evening approached, Daniel stepped outside for a moment, standing just beyond the glass doors as the fading sunlight softened the sky and the city continued moving around him, giving him space to reflect not on business or targets but on who he had been and who he had become, recognizing that he once